our fourth class of birds, bugs, and our place in the natural world. And today we have special guest, director of our Watershed Protection Program, Lauren Mcgrath. And she's going to take us on a journey through watershed conservation and macroinvertebrates, which a lot of people aren't familiar with that topic, and it's actually surprisingly fascinating. So, and I'm just going to do a brief little kind of where we left off last time, and then I'll let her take it away. All right, hopefully everybody can see. Okay, so we left off talking about sort of the worrying declines of birds today, and then we talked about a host of actions that we can all take to help conserve birds and to help their populations. And in particular, I talked about the two of the main things that the Trust is doing, which is modeling regenerative agriculture at our Rushton Woods Preserve and Farm, and then also banding birds there to study the species diversity and abundance, and to learn about the positive effects that land conservation has on bird populations today. And I just want to share with you, because our banding numbers are in from this season, our bird banding numbers, and we actually had our second best year in the 10, 11 years that we've been banding. We banded 1,400 new birds, which almost 1,400 new birds, and 10 more species than our best year, which was 2019. And so that just, it's exciting, and it's easy to say, hey, look, birds are increasing because look at our numbers. But actually, it's a testament more to land conservation is really key. All the items that we talked about to help birds, land conservation is very impactful. And one of the reasons that we believe we have this increase in birds at our banding station, increased number of species, is that we're seeing a Central Park effect. Because here we are just 20 miles west of Philadelphia. And so we believe that because we've got, you guys have probably all seen the rapid development happening in our area. It just seems like more and more each day. And so we believe that these migratory birds flying over, they're seeing less and less green patches to stop over in, less places to breed. And so they're sort of getting funneled into the few remaining conserved areas that are left. And so that's what we call a Central Park effect. More study is needed, but that's our theory for now of why we're seeing this increase in Rushton Woods, which is right in Newtown Square. And then lastly, we also talked about individual efforts that you guys can take, like from being more choosy about the coffee that you drink, about the plants that you plant in your yard, to restore food webs, and even becoming a bird watcher. And this is a funny little video that we didn't get to last time, so I'm just going to play this for you so you get a little laugh, and it's not all so serious.
Swainson's warbler.
Can you hear that? Okay.
Okay. All right, here we go. I don't see anything. Do you?
Yes, we hear it.
No, I lost it. I don't see it. No, it's just a stump. No, just flew. Oh, it flew. Can you see what color the legs are? Yellow legs, pink legs, black legs. It's only got one leg. Whoa, 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 up, whoa, up, whoa, whoa. Crap. All right. To the left of the second hill. Okay, in the big tree. You see that green tree? Go up about 20 feet. Go up, and then to the left. On the right is a pond. You see that island? Look to the right. It's right by that island. Look to the left. It's down on the ground. No, it's on the ground. No, it's just... No. Do you see that tree? Fairly common. Not fairly rare. Fairly uncommon. Fairly common but declining. Extinct. Fairly extinct. I know. What does it say in Sibley's? I don't know. Did you bring a Peterson's? What does it say in Sibley's? Did you bring a Peterson's? You bring a Sibley's? You bring a Peterson's? You bring a Peterson's? You brought a Crossley's?
Kirtland's warbler.
Another minute. Let's give it another minute. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes. 10 minutes. Let's give it 1 more hour. All right, so it's the third
Whoops.
left after the cows. You're using 8s? I can't use 8s. You use 8s? How can you use 8s? You use 8s? I can only use 10s. How can you use 10s? You use 10s? I can only use 8s. I can't use 10s. I need 9s. I think we'd be better off if we were seeing other people. It's just that, oh, this one's supposed to say tweet, tweet. Chuck-a-chee. Z, 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 2, 2, 2, 2. Puck, puck, puck. Sup, sup, chip, gip. It actually says that, gip. It doesn't say anything. Technically, we're not supposed to be here.
Downy woodpecker.
I'm hot. It's a little chilly. Are you hot? I'm freezing. Are you cold? I'm hot. Are you hot? Are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you sure? Man, I'm hot. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Now we dipped. Now we dipped. Now we dipped. We dipped. We dipped. We dipped. Dipped again. We dipped. Let's give it another minute.
All right, as you can see, birding is easy and not complicated and not time consuming at all. A great way to get into bird conservation.
Did anyone tell that guy to take the cover off his binocular lens?
What's that?
Did anyone tell that guy to take the cover off his binocular lens? Unless he was blind in that eye.
Yeah, he needs a little help with his birding skills. All right. Yeah. All right. Lauren, you can take it away. I think I've stopped my screen sharing.
All right, great. Can everyone see my screen? Beautiful. All right, so my name's Lauren Mcgrath. I'm the director of the Watershed Protection Program at Willistown Conservation Trust, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. Just a warning, this talk has a lot of bug pictures, so if you're not a bug person, I apologize in advance, but I tried to pick only the most lovely images, so hopefully it doesn't turn you off too quickly. So today we're going to be talking about stream insects and watershed conservation. We're starting off with one of my favorite insects. This is a stonefly. This is a picture from Crumb Creek. There's going to be lots of images of bugs, and I'll be calling them out here and there. If you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. I believe Lindsay's monitoring them, so if you have questions that you want to hold on to until the end, there should be time for discussion. But if it's a pressing one, pop it into the chat there and we'll address it as we head along. Right. So I am an aquatic ecologist, and I really focus a lot of my work on the stream insects. But we also do a lot of work looking at water chemistry and the other components of stream life. So riparian habitat, what's going on along the edges of those streams. But the insects really can tell us a lot about what's happening when we're not looking in the water. So before we get too far, I keep talking about macroinvertebrates. We can break this word down into two sections. So macro meaning large invertebrates without a spine. So when we're looking at macroinvertebrates, we're looking at animals without a backbone who are large enough to be seen with the naked eye. And then critically, they live all or part of their lives within the water body. So this can be things like gastropods, like snails, bivalves, which include mussels and clams, crustaceans, which include fish, and then obviously insects. So when I'm showing these images, these bug pictures are mostly of larval insects, which can look quite different from what we're familiar with. For example, on the left side of the screen, this is a dragonfly larva. This is not really what inspires the image of a dragonfly for most people, but this is how they start their lives. Dragonflies and damselflies in the family order Odonata live all of their juvenile stages up to 2 years in our streams before emerging as the dragonflies that we know and love. So it's really important that we look at our stream insects, because the aquatic macroinvertebrates we're looking at are some of the most ancient terrestrial animals. So these were some of the first organisms to crawl out of the primordial goo of the ocean and start colonizing our landscape. Before dinosaurs, before there were even flowering plants, there were insects in our streams. So because of that, our streams have the same kind of blueprint, no matter if you're in Chester County, Pennsylvania, the Rocky Mountains, Tibet. Every stream follows the same pattern. And this concept called the river continuum concept was developed actually locally just down the road in Avondale at Stroudwater Research Center. And the researchers there put together this, as they were doing more and more looking into stream habitats, that this same blueprint was throughout the world. And what this allows us to do as researchers is we can compare our headwater streams, our small streams in Chester County, to small streams in Colorado, to small streams in northern Canada. And we should be seeing the same kind of community structure in our headwaters, which is where the stream begins. And then it changes. We see different populations and body structures and niches opening up as you head down towards the mouth of the river. So as the stream is very small, it's very oxygen rich. There's lots of leaves coming in from the trees in the landscape, washing into the stream. So we've got lots of herbivores. And then as you start moving downstream, you get more of these collectors, and you see changes in body structure to adapt to the different conditions within the stream. And what this allows us to do is consider our world from a watershed perspective. So when I say watershed, I don't mean a pump house or a spring house. It's the area of land around a water body that has a common outlet. So if you think about a rainstorm on a mountain, the rain could fall on a ridgeline, and if it goes to the left, it might eventually end up in the Pacific, or if it goes to the right, it might end up in the Atlantic. The most important thing to consider when we think about watersheds is the reality that no matter where we are in this planet, what we're doing has the potential to influence the streams and eventually the ocean that those waterways flow into. So in the middle of the United States, from a watershed perspective, is this massive pink watershed, the Mississippi. So it's kind of hard to imagine, but the reality is that any sort of deforestation or development in southern Canada has the potential to influence the Gulf of Mexico. So watershed impact is something that we take very seriously, and we try to share this idea that every activity, that could be planting trees and picking up trash, benefits our watershed. And as a land protection organization, we really focus on that conservation side of things, protecting open spaces, leaving natural areas in our watershed that will improve water quality over time. So if you take away nothing from this talk, take away this idea that no matter where you are, you're in a watershed and you can be making a positive difference anywhere you go, even if it just means picking up that small candy wrapper that might have fallen out of your pocket while you're hiking. So that brings us to the very natural progression that trouts grow on trees. And this is a pretty thick expression that basically condenses down our trophic levels, our food chain. So we know that trout don't actually grow on trees, they grow in streams, but trout eat the insects that eat the leaves that come from trees. And so especially in small streams like the ones we work with at the Trust, it's really important to have a good understanding of how the plants that grow along our waterways are impacting the health of everything within the stream. So let's kind of break it down and take a minute to look at this, because it's a bit of a jump in logic. But along our stream bank, we have a big, beautiful oak tree. And in the fall, oak leaves are entering the stream, but that does not provide any immediate benefit to our brook trout, which we're working in the most lovely stream in all of the state. So of course we have to have our cold water representative, the brook trout, Pennsylvania's state fish and the only native trout to our state, actually. So what happens between this leaf entering the stream and our trout flourishing? Well, first, the leaf has to get slimy. And slime in a stream is one of the most important things that, that happens. So it's called a biofilm. And it's actually a really complicated and constantly evolving and changing community of algae, diatoms, bacteria, and fungus. And what biofilm does is it starts to kind of marinate and condition all of the carbon coming into the stream. So that can be leaves, branches, sticks, dead animals. The biofilm immediately starts to grow on those things, even on rocks, and it provides the first layer of our food chain. Biofilm is also very picky. So the biofilm that you get on an oak leaf will be different than the biofilm you get on a maple leaf, would be different from something that would grow on privet, a non-native plant. So this first step is very important. And if you have only non-native plants growing along the edge of your stream, you're going to have a very different biofilm that has a different nutrient transfer capability than if they were all native plants. So we really focus heavily on planting natives in our watershed, because you will change who's coming to, your leaf restaurant depending on who you're trying to serve. So we have our beautifully conditioned native oak leaf, and quickly come our herbivores. So there's a couple of different niches that exist for herbivores in our streams. The first on the left is a stonefly, which can act as a shredder. This is the animal that goes right for the leaf itself. So it likes a good marinated leaf pack, leaf litter. On the right, we have a mayfly, and this insect prefers to eat the biofilm itself. So it doesn't actually eat any of the leaf, it just scrapes all of the dressing off. The scrapers will change dramatically if you have non-native plants that are growing an unusual biofilm. So it's all of these little things that you can start to infer from looking at your insect community. But because we're in a stream where there's a flow and a current moving materials through the waterway, and we have a bunch of very messy eaters, we also have a niche for collectors. And these are the insects like the caddisfly, who will sit and wait as food comes towards them. They'll have themselves a buffet. So caddisflies are actually very closely related to order Lepidoptera, so that's butterflies and moths. And they can produce silk, and they use their silk to create cases, like this caddisfly on the screen, and others build webs and nets. So as the food comes through, they basically just build themselves a buffet table, and they can pick and select what they'd like to eat. So whenever you have a lot of herbivores, you're going to have predators. So this is probably one of the scariest pictures on the whole slide deck. This is a hellgrammite. It is and not an ambush predator, but it'll chase its food down. They're very good swimmers. They're very aggressive. They're wonderful. If you're a fly fisherman and you can find hellgrammites in your stream, you're going to have an awesome day. They make wonderful lures. So there are different types of predators, those that chase things down like a lion, and those that ambush, like our dragonflies, naturally. So dragonflies have some of the coolest predatory adaptations of any insect anywhere. And I'll take that one to the bank. So what looks like this little arm hanging out below this dragonfly's mouth that's holding on, the orange thing is actually a mayfly. And this little arm is actually a secondary set of jaws that hang below their mouth. And these jaws can extend out in a millisecond over 1/3 of their body length. So many dragonflies will sit and wait for something to come by and then poof, grab it. They are one of the most efficient predators in an aquatic system, and as well as in the air. They're only topped by one other animal on the planet that has 100% strike rate, and that is a pygmy seahorse. So it doesn't have to be scary to be terrifying, right? I do also want to point out this is what we're familiar with as a dragonfly. These are incredibly agile, fearsome predators in the air, and they're also fearsome in the water. So they go through such an incredible transformation and a bit of a glow up, right, from this kind of leafy, flat animal to this gorgeous, gorgeous, colorful aerial predator. Clearly, I like bugs, so thanks for bearing with me. So why do we study these things? We know, I think they're really cool and they're really beautiful, but they also tell us an amazing story about what's happening in our waterways. So when we do our monthly visits to all of our sites to do stream chemistry analysis, we have to take a water sample. And as soon as we remove the water from the stream, it becomes a snapshot in time. In this one moment, this is what the conditions were like in our waterway, which can be pretty challenging then to kind of get an idea of what it's like in the dark or during storm events or when it's unsafe to be in the stream. So we can look at the residents in the waterway to start to get a better idea of what conditions are like year round. Many of our insects, like our stoneflies, can live up to 18 months in their juvenile stage in the stream. So if we can understand the relationship between our population and community structure and water chemistry, we can very quickly start to get a good idea of what's happening in our waterways all throughout the year.
Question?
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to ask if dragonflies are related to damselflies.
Yes, they're in the same grouping, the Odonata. So they're cousins, both ancient.
I used to catch those damselflies when I waded around the stream when I was a kid. And also the water striders fascinated me. Do you know what they are?
Yeah, Gerridae. So we, funnily enough, water striders are not actually considered aquatic macroinvertebrates because they spend their adult, they're born on land and then they enter the surface of the water, but they don't go below the surface of the water. So we actually discount those from our counts, which I always thought was a little rude.
They literally walk on water.
They do, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited to have other bug enthusiasts on the call. This is such a delight. So when I'm talking about the population and community structure in our stream, we can break it down into a pretty straightforward grouping. So we've got group one. These are animals that are really intolerant to change. They like a healthy, cold, oxygen-rich stream with not too much outside contamination coming in. So the big three are our Mayflies, which are here in the middle with 3 tails, our stoneflies that have 2 tails, and then our Caddisflies, which are case making and net spinning. There are also really important things like ripple beetles, Damselflies, those Helgramites I was talking about, and water pennies. So if you're in a stream and you're seeing all of these things, it's a really good sign that your stream is pretty healthy. If you're not seeing any of those animals, but rather you're just seeing damselflies, maybe some dragonflies, dragonfly larva, scuds, that's a sign that there might have been some interference in your stream. But it's probably still pretty healthy. So, but if you're not seeing those things at all and you're just seeing midges and flatworms and black flies and leeches, kind of more of our like what are considered pests, something has happened in the stream that has significantly degraded water quality. And then if you're not even seeing those things, you're just seeing worms and those bright red midges and rat-tailed maggots, your stream is very unhealthy. And it's probably not a surprise if you're going in and looking for these insects and only seeing, you know, midges and worms. Looking around, you probably are in a pretty industrialized area. These insects can withstand any kind of abuse. And I've seen these bloodworm midge larvae in conditions that are almost marine. And I do want to note that you should see all of these insects together in a healthy ecosystem. So if you are seeing aquatic worms and stoneflies, that's a healthy ecosystem. It's just when you're only seeing aquatic worms that's when you should be concerned. So let's talk about our big three: Mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, and Trichoptera. These are our highly sensitive indicator species, and we consider them to be like canaries in the coal mine. So I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with that phrase. But back in the day, when there was not very much ventilation in our coal mining facilities, miners would bring a canary in a cage with them down into the mines. And if the canary stopped singing, it was an early warning that conditions were deteriorating and becoming unsafe. Usually it was carbon monoxide, but carbon dioxide buildup could also cause a canary to stop singing. And so you would leave and survive. But canaries are highly sensitive to changes in carbon monoxide concentration. So when they stop singing, that's your early warning alarm. Similarly, our sensitive indicator species, or mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, they'll start to disappear before there's any kind of more observable to us condition change within our stream. So their sensitivity to water quality is incredibly well documented between different orders, have different sensitivities, say, to changes in temperature and oxygen versus the introduction of potentially harmful chemicals like herbicides or pesticides. And so just by observing the presence or absence of these groups of animals, we can, have this good idea that we're early in the stages of change within our ecosystem. So it's not just looking at who's present or who's absent. We actually do like a lot of statistical analysis on this as well. I think just like Blake does with her bird analysis to get to that central park effect concept, we're doing something similar with our insects. So we go out, we collect a sample, and then we identify all of the insects back in the lab. And then we run, it's called a MOS score, and it's the Macroinvertebrate Aggregate Index for Streams score. MOS is so much easier, it rolls off the tongue, right? So if we have a high MOS score, so high is considered anything over 13.1, oh, our canaries are singing, it's a beautiful thing. We have a diverse and healthy, stable ecosystem. If we return to the stream the next year and we see that our MOS score has dropped below 13.1, but above 6, that's a sign that we've lost about 50% of our biodiversity. This is the kind of action area where it's time to start sleuthing and figuring out what's happening in the watershed upstream that might be causing this change in community structure. If you drop below that 6 level, your canary's done singing, she's dead, Tom, it's over. This is, if you drop below that 6 threshold, you are in a condition where you've lost over 90% of your biodiversity. So most of your insects are gone. We're down to those bright red Chironomidae, those midges, and rat-tailed maggots. It's a really unhealthy ecosystem and would require a lot of restoration to get it back up into a healthy level. So we always hope to see above a 13.1. Oftentimes, just because of the level of development in our region, we fall kind of in those yellow bars where there has been some impact, but there's promise through regenerative or restorative practices, we can start to bring those numbers back up again. And to sample, it's very straightforward. We bring a net into the stream and then agitate the rocks to drive the insects to start to flee, and then they get pushed into the net. So you can do this in a number of different ways, but the concepts are all the same. If you use a Cerber sampler or a D-frame kick net or a seine kick net, it's all the same idea. It's agitation to get those insects to flee, and then you collect them in your net, bring them back to the lab for analysis. So because it's a stream system, we have a lot of insects that are very, very good at holding on to rocks. So we always bring a scrub brush out and we will scrub all of the larger rocks to get all of those sticky insects, because those can oftentimes be things like water pennies and caddisflies. And we don't want to neglect collecting them because it would skew our data set to look less healthy than what it might actually be. So now it's time to really get into some bugs. if you are enjoying this bug talk, I would encourage you to visit this website. It's called macroinvertebrates.org. This is a collaborative effort between Stroud-Water Research Center and the Carnegie Mellon Institute, where Stroud brought their best samples of insects to Carnegie, who used their scanning electron microscope to get high resolution images. And then it's very educational. You can click and flip and look at all of these amazing adaptations to really see how these insects have evolved to be perfectly adapted for our waterways. So let's take a closer look at our big three. Let's start with our mayflies. Mayflies have 2 to 3 tails. Here, this beautiful Heptagenidae or flat-headed mayfly has 3 fully formed tails, and then it has gills on its backside. Mayflies will always have visible gills, so that's one of the easiest ways to identify them. Mayflies also have one of the richest diversity of body shapes, and so we'll go through a couple of them, but always the common factors are going to be these visible gills and 2 to 3 fully formed tails. As an adult, though, they look very different. And you may have encountered mayflies throughout your life. I can almost guarantee it. They're well known in their adult form for only living for a day, but they can actually be quite old, 2 to 3 years in some cases. So they have 3 tails as adults, but usually that 3rd center tail becomes vestigial. It becomes much smaller. And they have a body shape that looks a little like a sailboat. So they hold their wings up kind of like prayer hands. And then they have 24 to 48 hours in their adult form to learn how to use their wings, figure out what a mate is, how to mate, where to lay their eggs. And somehow this very bizarre life strategy has worked incredibly well. Mayflies are known for being incredibly sensitive, but wildly robust, and are able to recuperate quickly after they've been disturbed out of an ecosystem, maybe through a major storm event or a toxic deposition of chemicals into the waterways. Once it clears, and they're able to quickly migrate back in. And that's in part because they're horrible flyers and they just get carried around by the wind, and wherever they land is where they'll lay their eggs. So it works. This is also a mayfly, right? This looks very, very different from our other friend, the flat-headed or cookie-headed mayfly. So this is a common burrowing mayfly. And we know it's a mayfly because it's got these 3 very nicely formed tails, these beautiful feathery gills on its backside. And this is a burrowing mayfly. So while our flat-headed mayflies would be commonly found in riffles, so where there's a lot of agitation, these would be found in stiller waterways where there's muddy or loose sand substrate. So they're very common in the Mississippi River Basin. You run into them in ponds oftentimes, or lakes that have muddy banks. And they use these gigantic horns on the front end to help them burrow, and they dig in to the side of the bank where they have a burrow and they can stay safe. So as an adult, they're quite large. This is the top of a Queen Anne's lace flower head. And you can see that this is like a 2-inch long insect. But again, 2 fully formed tails with a small vestigial tail, and then these nice sailboat wings. So these are always exciting to see. You'll find them commonly in the Poconos and Endless Mountains. And then last mayfly, just because it's a local favorite, it's the best mayfly, I think. And this is the brush-legged mayfly. They have this fantastic fringe off the front of their arms that you can see here. And these live just below riffle areas, and they sit with their arms up in the air like goalposts. And then as food comes through, it'll get caught on their fringe, and then they're able to clean it off and get their food delivered to them. So they're really beautiful. They're all over the place at Kirkwood Preserve. So if you ever want to go looking for them at the stream crossing, if you just head downstream a little bit, you'll find them swimming around. Onto the stoneflies. which are one of my favorites, but I think I've said that about every insect so far. So take from that what you will. Stoneflies are really sensitive. These are oftentimes the first insects to disappear from an ecosystem with disturbance. The irony is that they used to be quite common, and so this Perlidae is called the common stonefly, even though it's fairly uncommon at this point. But when we do find them, they are absolutely jaw-dropping. They are bright fluorescent yellow with this gorgeous black design on them that helps them camouflage. And stoneflies are easy to identify because they always only have two very robust tails on their backside. And if they have visible gills, they'll be tucked into their armpits. And you know when they're stressed because they do push-ups like Marines. And then they have two large claws at the end of each foot. But that might be a little challenging to see when you're out in the field if you don't have a hand lens or something. So usually the two tails is the big ID giveaway. And then as adults, they look almost exactly the same as they did as larvae, but they have two flat wings that lay across their bodies. The adults look a little bit like earwigs, and I've seen people get upset when they see stonefly adults on their like screen doors that they think it's an earwig infestation, but it's not. It's an awesome water quality indicator. But they're next to each other in the phylogenetic tree. They're very closely related, stoneflies and earwigs. All right, and next we have the caddisflies. So this is the last of the big three that we're looking at. So this is a Hydropsychidae. It's a net spinning caddisfly. They're also called common net spinners. And these are really easy to identify and incredibly common in Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek. This is very fine. So they have a hardened head case, and then they may have up to 3 hardened back plates that will correspond with their arms. And then they have this kind of caterpillar-like body. Oftentimes they'll have these big fluffy gills, and then a big hook on their backside. And that hook helps stabilize them in the current. So this particular insect spins, kind of looks like a horn. So it's got a wide end and a turn and a small end. And they live in the small end, and then they pop out to feed on the buffet of food that gets delivered to the wide side of their horn. They're really, really fascinating insects and are considered ecosystem engineers. But they're also really beautiful. So they spin a silk that they use for binding sticks, stones, shells, pieces of leaf litter into a case. And their case is movable, so they will carry it around with them. It provides camouflage and it provides protection. So they're very charismatic, especially if you only give them precious jewels to build their cases out of. So there is a sustainable group of artists who are utilizing the creativity and ingenuity of caddisflies, and they're just raising these insects within terrariums that are full of, in this case, pieces of gold and turquoise and other precious gems. And then when the caddisfly turns into its adult stage, it just leaves the case behind. And so the caddisflies are released and the cases are dried out and dipped in resin and turned into earrings, pendants, and necklaces. So it's one of the most fantastic, ways to really promote the amazing importance of caddisflies in a way that's also beautiful and creative. But when I say these animals are ecosystem engineers, they are on par with beavers for how they can change and improve the ecosystem. So in a healthy stream, you should have hundreds of thousands of caddisflies within a square meter, which is, not a very large space. But when you have all of these animals, they are using silk to bind rocks together and create basically a refuge. So during storm events, areas with high concentrations of caddisflies actually have lower rates of erosion and scour within the stream bed, It provides safe spaces for small fish and other insects to take cover in during destructive events. And so you see much more rapid recovery after destruction within areas that have lots of caddisflies, which is crazy because they're this big. So it's really encouraging to see the, you know, as a community, they can really do a lot to benefit. And I feel like there's some nice parallels to draw there with the work that we do as conservationists. And then I guarantee you've seen caddisfly adults before. They look like small moths. They hold their wings at kind of tented over their bodies, and the wings are covered in small scales. So they look very much like small moths or butterflies, and they do fly into halogen lights. So if you leave your lights on in the summertime, you'll probably see.
Lunch and learn. You are the best.
This one's not the best, but
You are
I'm
the
getting
best.
close.
So one thing I want to point out is that
Tomorrow.
there are newer stream residents. So our flies actually came from the primordial ooze a couple of millions of years after our more ancient community members. So they go through, and this might take you back to high school biology.
What at 10:15?
Sorry, I think
Oh, well,
someone might have.
And I hope it's going to be warm enough because it changed. It was supposed to be like 70 now. It's
Excuse me, can we pause and just make sure everybody's muted? We can hear somebody. Thank you.
I got to get a lot done between now. I got to work.
Somebody's, who is that? Let me find the culprit. Sorry, Lauren.
Oh, no, it's okay.
All right. It looks like everybody's muted now.
No, there's one that's not.
Would you like Thursday?
Patty Wright at the bottom.
Do I have, let me see if I can, okay, I'll mute her. I can do that as a host. There you go. Okay, she's muted. Sorry, Lauren.
Oh, one of the challenges of Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to take everyone back to high school biology, we have some animals or some insects that go through complete metamorphosis. So these are our flies, our caddisflies, black flies, all go through a pupal stage. So eggs turn into larvae, and our larvae are what we really are studying when we're looking at our stream communities. And then they pupate and turn into adults. Our more ancient stream life, so things like our stoneflies, mayflies, dragonflies, and damselflies go through an incomplete metamorphosis where the egg turns into a larva, which will grow over a period of time and then emerge into its adult stage. So it skips that pupal step. One of the things that I'm reminded of every year when students come out with me to do our insect collection is how absolutely primordial these insects are. And it's amazing when you start to look back into the fossil records that they're all represented there, but much larger in many cases. And I am very, very thankful that we exist in the time that we do, that there's not a 4-foot wide dragonfly that might come by when we're stream sampling to wreak havoc. So it's always important, I think, to remember on the scale of geologic time that we're working within, we are just a small little bump in the road. And oftentimes we have to think about that when we come to a site that has become rapidly degraded, that, you know, if we give it 1,000 more years, it might look completely different than what we're thinking a healthy ecosystem would look like now. Which is why I always like to remember that and remind folks of that, because especially in the realm of 24-hour news cycle, there's a lot of negative news that comes out, especially around environmental degradation, that these are robust communities. And the only thing that has ever stopped stoneflies and mayflies from permanently returning have been the glaciers. And it's worth noting that only stopped them for a couple of 1,000 years, and then they still managed to move all the way back up into the Arctic Circle again. So mayflies especially have this very delicate life cycle, but they remain one of the most commonly seen insects around the world. Every continent has mayflies on it. which is one of the most encouraging and kind of terrifying things when we think about our insects and our insect communities and the work that we're looking at. And a big part of what makes mayflies so successful is the mass emergence events that come through. So I know we were talking about brood X earlier, which is a 17-year cycle. Mayflies, if the conditions are good, will do it every single year. So these animals, or insects rather, all of the larvae will turn into their adult form on the same day and will rise in such numbers that they show up on Doppler radar as weather patterns. And it is incredible. And one of the most beautiful things, if you don't mind bugs. So in the Susquehanna River Basin in 2019 in Lancaster County, in 2018 in Lancaster County, there was the first mass emergence event in almost 100 years. And it did not go over well with the community, who was unprepared for the suddenly much longer commute, as many bridges were being closed across the Susquehanna. They had to get snow plows out to clear away all of the piles of insects. And see a mass emergence event it's awe-inspiring. These are hundreds of millions of mayflies all at once coming out for their big last hurrah before they die. And these events are really, really, really important. If you hate bugs, but you like birds, you should be rooting for our mayfly mass emergence events, because every time there is a mass growth of this beautiful protein-rich, calorie-dense food source, birds do much better. So I'm sure you've already gone over how all baby birds eat insects. And so when we have healthy waterways, we have far more insects to choose from to feed our small chicks that are growing. And emergence events for mayflies happen, you might have guessed, in late April through May, which is around the time that a lot of birds are starting to hatch. So the more large emergence events we can get, even though it might derail our life for a day or two, it's so much better for our ecosystem. It's an amazing source of fertilizer. So plants do much better where there are mass emergence effects. And so we get increased numbers of babies the following spring. So it's all good news. As unnerving as this might be for this poor car owner who had the bad luck of parking under a halogen light during an emergence event.
Lauren, I have a question. How long do the mayflies live? Why were there just piles of dead ones after the emergence event?
They've got maybe 24 to 48 hours.
So these are the ones that just didn't get to make it to because they lay their eggs in the water.
They do lay their eggs in the water. So this parking lot, this is actually in Michigan. This is right next to the lake. Mm-hmm. So these are probably mostly males. So the males just sort of expire, and then the females will go over to start laying their eggs.
I see.
Yeah, it's really poorly understood still. What conditions being right means varies from species to species. But in the days of early colonization in the United States, there were mass emergence events weekly as different species of mayflies would come out at different periods of time. So it was like this regular bounty of insect protein. And they're limited by the amount of body fat that they can store. Adults don't have functional mouth parts. So as soon as they emerge into their adult form, a timer starts for their countdown. So they do expire very quickly after mating, but they can last a little longer if they remain celibate or are unlucky in love.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Can you say anything about spotted lanternflies?
Ooh, spotted lanternflies are that could be a whole talk on itself. So they have two sets of what look like eyes. They have small black eyes, and then there's bright orange, yellowy eyes, which are actually pheromone detectors. So when they start to gather together, like they did last year in Philadelphia, they could sense where everyone was coming together for their breeding and would flock together. So rather than a mass emergence event, it was more of a mass gathering, because they can live, I mean, as we're learning, quite a long time. But unlike mayflies, who are a delicacy that will be consumed in mass by everything that comes across it, lanternflies are quite gross tasting, it seems like. They've got some flavor packs within their body that are deterrents. So it took some time, but it seems like a number of animals are figuring out how to consume them. The corvids, the blue jays in particular, seem to be figuring it out and spreading the word. Spiders, I know, are starting to consume them, and assassin bugs have figured it out pretty quickly. So they, lanternflies are from the Korean peninsula and were introduced into this area. Mayflies existed on this continent before it was separated from Africa. So there's a slightly different evolutionary importance as a food source for mayflies versus lanternflies, if that makes sense.
With this dead protein that's laying there on the ground, how is it used? What do they do with it?
Yeah, so in a natural system, this would be on a tree or in a field. And so the insects would be consumed by anything coming by. So birds, possums, raccoons, weasels. It is a really, really valuable food source. Mice love mayflies. And what wasn't eaten would quickly become incorporated into the soil, and that area would have increased growth rates of plants in the following year. It's like it's a perfect fertilizer. In a parking lot, a lot of it probably is going to waste. I know people come out with shovels and are shoveling it out of the way, maybe onto the grass, maybe into the water where the fish will eat it. They dry out pretty quickly. So if you just leave them lie, they will like blow around and kind of spread out a little bit. I don't know in this particular scenario what happened with all of these insects, or if they were able to dig out their car from the inches of mayflies. But in a natural system, only good things result from this. It probably stinks a little bit, though. I'll be honest with that. And I know that's an issue with the 17-year cicada emergence as well. That if it's not eaten right away, it just starts to rot and gets integrated back into the forest soils. But great question. So in our stream ecosystem, we're still working on understanding exactly what's happening in the water, but we know very well what's happening on the banks, where we can see, where we can interact with things in a much easier way. So it's very important that we are taking good care of our landscape, as it's going to directly influence the life happening within the stream. I would not like to swim in this waterway. It doesn't look great and inviting and welcoming. And, you know, you might not necessarily know why that's the case, but that gut feeling is usually a pretty good indicator of stream health. This is a place I would like to hang out and spend time, and maybe set up a hammock and watch the birds and the insects and, you know, the fish that are swimming in the stream. So it's really important as we start to practice being naturalists, when we're out in the fields looking at our environment, to start feeling, you know, how does this make you feel looking at this landscape? If you see a stream like this, or if you live near a stream like this, there's a lot you can start to do to improve it. And the first thing that's most obviously embodied in this image is don't mow all the way up to the stream's edge. The plants that grow along the waterways are really important for filtering out any pollutants that are coming in, for stabilizing the soil and slowing erosion. If you can, plant native plants and trees along your waterways, and encourage other people to plant them in their yards. A native plant does so much good. That's a whole talk in and of itself. It does so much good for the soil and for the water. If you can, avoid using chemical treatments on your property. And I recognize that not everyone has that liberty to make that choice. So if you are living in an area that has an HOA, maybe talk to your HOA folks or the people who are doing treatments on the property to make sure that chemicals aren't being applied right before a rainstorm, because it doesn't have time to integrate into the plants. And instead you're wasting money. It's all washing into the stream where it's wreaking havoc on that stream life. And the easiest of all is pick up trash when you see it. Plastic pollution is a major concern in every part of our planet right now. If you're feeling really motivated, you can organize a stream cleanup, or there are loads of organizations in our area that do this work. So I know the Chester Ridley Crumb Watershed Association does a large cleanup every year, and so does the Darby Creek Valley Watershed Association. So if you want to get involved, you can contact us for ways to find out where stream cleanups are happening near you, or ways that you can organize it yourself. So I want to thank you all so much for having me. Blake has my contact information. I know we ran a little long and I apologize. But if there are any questions, I would love to hear from you. And I hope this was informational and a little bit unusual, I'm sure, as we don't all think about our insects and where they come from so often.